Hello friends, I'm Elder Keith Ellis, I'm pastor of Paradise Primitive Baptist Church in Arlington, Texas. Today I'd like to take up the topic of the total depravity of man. Now, depravity results from man's original sin in the Garden of Eden. It's a condition that every person that's born into this world possesses. Depravity means that man is a sinner, and when we say total depravity, we mean that by nature man is totally a sinner. Solomon tells us this in Ecclesiastes 7:20. For there's not a just man upon the earth that doeth good and sinneth not. Now, some people have the idea that there's a spark of goodness within man which will enable him to cooperate with the Spirit of God in regeneration or the new birth. But as we examine the Bible, we'll see that nothing can be further from the truth. We'll show that no one by his own power can escape this condition. Look at this verse in Romans 5:12. Wherefore, as by one man sin entered into the world, and death by sin, and so death passed upon all men, for that all have sinned. Here we see that one man, Adam, sinned, and a death ensued. Now, I'll be quick to tell you that Adam didn't die a spiritual death, because he wasn't a spiritual creature. He died to the fellowship of God, and was immediately driven from the garden, separated from the presence of God. This separation is the death we'll be speaking of in this lesson. This nature is passed to every person that has ever lived or will ever live on this earth, except in the Lord Jesus Christ. Now, I want to let you know that this isn't a feel-good doctrine, brothers and sisters. It puts man in his place. It's not the message that man wants to hear, but it's what he needs to hear. So let's look at some verses that describe man in this fallen condition. Isaiah had this to say in chapter 64 and verse 6. But we are all as an unclean thing, and all our righteousness are as filthy rags. And we all do fade as a leaf, and our iniquities like the wind have taken us away. Listen to David in Psalms 51:5. Behold, I was shapen in iniquity, and in sin did my mother conceive me. Here David says that he was shapen in iniquity. Iniquity is shapen or interwoven into every fiber of our nature. Let's listen to Job on the subject in chapter 15, verse 16. How much more abominable and filthy is man, which drinketh iniquity like water? Now man in his depraved nature has an abominable, filthy, unquenchable thirst to drink in iniquity and work it out in sinning against God. And for this reason, God destroyed the world the first time with the flood. Before the flood, God described man's condition in Genesis 6:5. And God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. Notice he didn't say that man had a spark of good in him, or that he only thought about evil sometimes, but that his thoughts and imaginations were evil only continually. And this is not a condition that men grow into, as some think. As David mentioned in the previous quote, that we are conceived in sin. Though we may think them to be innocent, even newborn babies have this depraved nature. In our sight they may be innocent, but in God's they are totally depraved. So there's no such thing as an age of accountability. David tells us in Psalms 58:3, the wicked are estranged from the womb. They go astray as soon as they be born, speaking lies. Now, even in their mother's womb, they're as much of a hell-deserving sinner as any adult who's left in an unregenerate state. Ever notice that you don't have to teach a child to have a temper, to lie, steal, cheat, hate, or to be selfish? That's because it's in their nature to do these things. It comes natural to them. But we do have to teach them to do what's right, because doing right is contrary to their nature. Now, some folks think that we can just teach man to love God, but this is an impossibility for man to accomplish. Hear what Paul says about the natural man's inability to receive spiritual instruction. But the natural man receiveth not the things of the Spirit of God, for they are foolishness unto him. Neither can he know them, because they are spiritually discerned. 1 Corinthians 2:14. Here we're clearly told that the natural man cannot know the things of God because he considers them foolish. Now, the things of God can only be understood by someone who's born of the Spirit of God. Now, here's more from Paul. For they that are after the flesh do mind the things of the flesh, but they that are after the Spirit, the things of the Spirit. Romans 8:5. But someone would still say, we just need to give our hearts to Jesus and then we can be born again. Well, let me tell you, friends, Jesus doesn't want your heart, and here's why. Jeremiah 17:9 we read, the heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. Who can know it? Well, God knows it. You think Jesus wants that heart? No. That's why we're given a new heart in regeneration. Look at Ezekiel 36 and 26. Now, Paul gives us a detailed description of man in this fallen condition. He says, as it is written, there's none righteous, no, not one. There's none that understandeth. There's none that seeketh after God. They are all gone out of the way. They are together become unprofitable. There is none that doeth good, no, not one. Their throat is an open sepulchre. With their tongues they have used deceit. The poison of asp is under their lips, whose mouth is full of cursing and bitterness. Their feet are swift to shed blood. Destruction and misery are in their ways, and the way of peace have they not known. There is no fear of God before their eyes. Romans 3, 10 through 18. These verses don't need any explanation. This is the nature that every man that's born into this world possesses, and it's described as a death. A man in this condition doesn't want God in his life, and all the prayer, begging, pleading, and preaching of man can do nothing to change this condition. And if this man is left in this totally depraved condition, then he's hell-bound, and rightly so. Why, you may ask? Because this is what we deserve on account of our sin against a just, holy, and righteous God. Now, in Ephesians 2:1, we hear the Apostle Paul say this, and you hath he quickened who were dead in trespasses and sins. Now, let me ask you a question. Can dead men do anything? Of course not. A person has to be alive before he can act. So a person that's dead in trespasses and sins can't exercise a free will to be born again. Absolutely not. Remember, the natural man receives not the things of the Spirit of God. John said in chapter 1, verse 12, that as many as received Jesus, them gave he power to become the sons of God. And this simply means they have the authority to manifest their heritage. Is that a contradiction? No, it's not, because we need to read the next verse, and we can see how they were able to receive Christ. Verse 13 says, which were born, not of blood, nor of the will of the flesh, nor of the will of man, but of God. Those who received Him in verse 12 were already born of God. And it wasn't according to the will of the flesh or the will of man. This is the only way that anyone can believe on Jesus, to be born of God from above. Now, in Matthew 7 and 17, Jesus says this, even so, every good tree bringeth forth good fruit, but a corrupt tree bringeth forth evil fruit. Man in a state of nature is a corrupt tree. Man who is born again is a good tree. Jesus goes on to say, a good tree cannot bring forth evil fruit. Neither can a corrupt tree bring forth good fruit. Matthew 7 and 18. Now let me ask you a question. Is accepting Christ a good fruit or an evil fruit? Of course it's a good fruit. So what kind of tree does it come from? It must come from a good tree, right? So if a person accepts Christ, it is proof he is already a good tree. Can an evil tree, man in a state of death and trespasses and sins, bring forth good fruit of acceptance of Christ? No. Jesus said a corrupt tree cannot bring forth good fruit. Have you made the connection yet? Man in the state of nature can only bring forth evil fruit. That is, if you believe what Jesus says. Same question about faith. Is it a good fruit or an evil fruit? Again, we see it's a good fruit and comes from a good tree. After all, faith is part of the ninefold fruit of the Spirit. Faith is the effect or the fruit of the Spirit working in a person. It's not the cause of the new birth, but the effects of it are resulting from the new birth. Now, consider an apple tree. Does an apple pop into midair and then a tree grow in under it? No. The tree comes first and then the fruit appears. Saying that believing in or accepting Jesus as the cause of the new birth is like saying that the fruit comes first and then the tree. So if we have faith, it's an evidence or fruit of what kind of tree we are. Faith is not the cause of becoming a good tree. It's the evidence that someone is a good tree. So I'll ask you, what kind of tree are you?